When we trace the intellectual roots of strategy, we often talk about Porter, Chandler, Mintzberg, or Ansoff. Yet before many of these figures wrote their landmark works, there was Edith Penrose, an economist whose 1959 book, The Theory of the Growth of the Firm, quietly but profoundly influenced the entire field. Penrose was not writing in the language of consultants or management gurus. She was an academic economist, and her work was subtle, careful, and grounded in the realities of how firms actually behave. But the insights she provided were transformative, and they continue to shape how we think about firms, strategy, and growth. In fact, her ideas laid the intellectual foundation for what later became known as the resource-based view of the firm, one of the dominant paradigms in strategy research. Penrose began with a simple but powerful question: how and why do firms grow? At first glance, this might seem straightforward. Firms grow to make more profit, to capture more market share, or to achieve economies of scale. But Penrose was not satisfied with these surface explanations. She wanted to dig deeper into the internal dynamics of the firm itself, to understand not only the economic incentives, but also the organizational processes that drive or constrain growth. One of her key insights was to view the firm not merely as a unit of production, but as a collection of resources. These resources are not just machines or capital. They include human skills, organizational routines, managerial experience, and knowledge. A firm, in Penrose's view, is a bundle of resources tied together in an administrative framework. The growth of a firm, therefore, depends on how these resources are used, combined, and redeployed. This may sound familiar, because decades later, strategy scholars would formalize this into the resource-based view, emphasizing unique, valuable, rare, inimitable, and non-substitutable resources as sources of competitive advantage. But Penrose saw it first long before the terminology was popularized. She understood that resources inside the firm create both opportunities and constraints. Another of her important insights was that managerial resources, in particular, are limited. Growth requires managers to plan, coordinate, and integrate new activities. But there is only so much managerial capacity available at a given time. This creates what Penrose called an administrative limit to growth. A firm might have plenty of financial resources or market opportunities, but if it lacks managerial capacity to integrate expansion effectively, growth will stall or backfire. We can see this dynamic in many real-world examples. Consider startups in the technology sector. A small group of founders might create a product that scales rapidly in terms of customer demand. But the ability of the firm to grow depends not only on money from investors or demand from users, but on whether the management team can handle scaling, hiring people, building processes, ensuring quality, and coordinating increasingly complex operations. Often, firms stumble not because the market is absent, but because their managerial capacity is stretched too thin. This is exactly the kind of problem Penrose was pointing to. Penrose also emphasized the role of learning. As firms grow, they accumulate knowledge and experience, and this in turn creates opportunities for further growth. For example, a company that builds expertise in one product line often discovers opportunities to apply that expertise in adjacent areas. This creates what Penrose described as a self-generating process of growth, where learning begets opportunity, which begets further learning. Growth is not just about seizing external opportunities, it is about how internal capabilities evolve and generate new possibilities. A classic illustration of this can be seen in the evolution of 3M, Originally a mining company, 3M developed expertise in abrasives and adhesives. Over time, it leveraged that expertise into products as diverse as sandpaper, masking tape, and eventually Post-it notes. Each new product built on knowledge developed in prior activities. The firm's growth trajectory was not random, but shaped by the internal resources it accumulated. This is Penrose's theory in action. Firms grow by finding new ways to use their existing resources, stretching them into new domains, and in the process, developing yet more capabilities. But Penrose also recognized that growth has limits. The administrative capacity of the firm creates bottlenecks. Overexpansion can lead to inefficiency, poor coordination, and even collapse. She rejected the idea that firms could grow indefinitely just by adding capital or chasing markets. Growth is a dynamic process, shaped by the interplay of resources, managerial limits, and opportunities for learning. Her work also carries an implicit critique of purely market-based views of competition. Traditional economics often treated firms as black boxes that simply transformed inputs into outputs. Penrose opened the box. She showed that what happens inside firms, the deployment of resources, the development of capabilities, the constraints of management, is central to understanding competition and growth. This shift in perspective was revolutionary. It moved the study of strategy away from abstract market structures and toward the internal realities of organizations. In the decades after Penrose's book, her ideas were picked up and extended by strategy scholars. The resource-based view, which emerged in the 1980s and 1990s, owes an enormous debt to her. J. Barney's influential work on resources as sources of sustained competitive advantage is essentially a formalization of Penrose's insights. The concept of dynamic capabilities developed by scholars like David Teese is also rooted in Penrose's emphasis on learning and resource redeployment. Without Penrose, these later developments might never have taken shape. It is important to note that Penrose's insights were not purely abstract. They reflected her own life experience and careful observation. She was deeply engaged with the realities of business history and management practice. Her writing style is dense and sometimes challenging, but it rewards careful reading with profound insights. Unlike Porter, whose crisp frameworks are easy to teach in MBA classrooms, Penrose requires patience. But the reward is a richer, more nuanced understanding of growth. Let us consider another modern example to see her relevance. Take Amazon. In its early years, Amazon was simply an online bookseller. But as it grew, it developed capabilities in logistics, distribution, and digital platforms. These resources opened up opportunities to expand into new product categories, eventually selling everything from electronics to groceries. Then, the technological expertise and infrastructure developed for its own operations became the foundation for Amazon Web Services, one of the most profitable arms of the company today. This is pure Penrose. The growth of the firm is driven by the redeployment of internal resources into new areas, creating a self-generating cycle of expansion. At the same time, Amazon has repeatedly faced the administrative challenges of growth, from managing a vast workforce to coordinating across diverse businesses, reminding us that growth is not without limits. Ethically, Penrose's work also invites reflection. If firms are bundles of resources that seek growth, how should that growth be guided? Growth for its own sake can lead to monopolistic dominance, exploitation of workers, or environmental harm. Penrose herself did not dwell extensively on ethics, but in today's world, her insights about the internal drivers of growth remind us that strategy must consider not just profit, but responsibility. If resources include people, then ethical treatment of employees is part of the growth story. If resources include knowledge, then how that knowledge is used for the public good or for manipulation becomes a strategic and ethical question. Penrose also reminds us of the importance of humility in strategic management. Firms cannot grow endlessly without encountering limits. Recognizing those limits, understanding the constraints of managerial capacity, and respecting the balance between ambition and capability are essential. The downfall of many firms lies not in a lack of opportunity, but in overestimating their ability to manage complexity. The 2008 financial crisis, for example, was partly a story of financial firms growing beyond their managerial and regulatory capacity, creating instruments and markets they could not fully control. Penrose would not have been surprised. For students and managers, the lessons from Penrose are clear. First, look inside the firm. Resources and capabilities matter as much as market opportunities. Second, understand that growth is a dynamic, path-dependent process shaped by learning and resource redeployment. Third, recognize limits. Managerial capacity is finite and unchecked expansion can be dangerous. Finally, consider responsibility. Growth affects people and societies, and strategy must account for these impacts. When we place Penrose alongside Chandler, Porter, Mintzberg, and Ansoff, we see a rich tapestry of insights. Chandler shows us the link between strategy and structure. Porter stresses positioning and trade-offs. Mintzberg emphasizes learning and emergence. Ansoff systematizes growth directions. And Penrose roots us in the internal dynamics of the firm, reminding us that resources, capabilities, and managerial limits shape the possibilities of strategy. Together, these thinkers form the backbone of strategic management as a discipline. To conclude, Edith Penrose's The Theory of the Growth of the Firm remains one of the most important and enduring contributions to strategy. It reminds us that firms are not abstract entities, but living organizations with resources, people, and learning processes. Growth is not automatic, nor is it unlimited. It is a process of discovery, of stretching resources into new uses, of balancing ambition with capacity. More than 60 years after its publication, Penrose's work continues to guide scholars and practitioners alike, shaping our understanding of how firms grow, why they stumble, and what it takes to sustain advantage in a complex world.